Chapter 309, Ling Han of Two Lives. Editor Kurisu. Afterwards, an ordinary-looking elder appeared and entered another private room. The most important thing for the Spirit Treasures Pavilion to ensure was fair practice in their business. Thus, since these two people were able to enter a private room on the 5th floor, this obviously meant that they, or the party they represented, was at least not weaker than the status of an Earth-grade low-level alchemist. That elder was in the flower blossoming tier. Ling Han was a bit surprised. It was indeed quite impressive that the auction today would actually tempt a powerful elite of the flower blossoming tier to come. A stream of people continued to enter, and soon after, he heard a very distinctive voice. Fairy Chi, what a coincidence to see you again. We are really fated, so why don't we sit together? Hey, from the day before yesterday until now, we've met for a total of 17 times. There were actually as many as 17 times? Then it really seems like we are definitely fated. Fairy Chi, looking at me today, don't you think I'm a little bit more perverted? Get lost. Ling Han cast his gaze out the window and down below, and there he saw Gu Fenghua dogging Chi Hua Lan's heels, his grin wicked bright, his steps quick and eager as he chased her. The pervert looked pleased beyond measure, as if the whole world were a pleasant joke, and she the only prize worth pursuing. The two of them also climbed upstairs, yet they did not ascend to the 5th floor. Clearly, they were still unqualified to sit within the private rooms here. As for whether they settled on the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th floor, Ling Han had no such leisure as to unfurl the eye of truth, merely to pry at that detail. So the outsider martial artists the younger people of the 9 nations of the desolate north had seen were these two. In the private room, Guang Yuan and the others felt this was truly a rare novelty. In ordinary days, they were not qualified to step into such a private chamber. Even if the decorations and adornments around them were nothing that would shock the heavens, they still wandered about the room, stroking this and tapping that, feeling that everything was uncommon, everything touched with the air of privilege. Liu Yutong and Li Shichan were girls, so they naturally had to mind their image. Thus, they sat prim and proper, backs straight, bearing composed. Hu Niu, on the other hand, could not be bothered with such restraint and continued clinging to Ling Han's arms, laughing as if she owned the place. After a while, the auction finally began. Ling Han, finding it dull, leaned forward and drifted to sleep. Hu Niu, meanwhile, endlessly teased him with her little hands, poking and tugging, making mischief without pause. Adult and child played joyously and in harmony, such that Liu Yutong and Li Xichan, watching from the side, felt envy rise in their hearts, each wanting nothing more than to take Hu Niu's place. The two girls exchanged a look and nodded simultaneously. They both felt that they could not be careless just because Hu Niu was little. This little girl could not be underestimated. Moreover, after another 10 years, the little girl should have grown up into a big girl, and it would be too late by that time to guard against her. Guard against fire, guard against thieves, and guard against Hu Niu. Everyone, the item that is going to be presented to all of you now is a treasure from the ancient era and possesses a high symbolic significance, the auctioneer proclaimed, words spilling forth as spittle flew in every direction. And that is the alchemy furnace that was once used by the inventor of the Three-Fire Guide and acclaimed as the Alchemy Emperor, Grandmaster Ling Han. Ling Han? Guang Yuan, Liu Yutong, and the others all turned their eyes to Ling Han. They could naturally tell that this Ling Han was not their Ling Han, yet the two of them bore the same name, and both were geniuses upon the alchemical path, so they could not help but feel astonishment ripple through them. Haha, I heard there is also a person here named Ling Han. From one of the private rooms came a cold voice, aged and hoary, like frost on old stone. He really doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth to actually dare to have the same name as the Alchemy Emperor. Haha, he really has overestimated his own abilities. It's nothing strange to have the same name, but how accomplished was Ling Han, Grandmaster Ling, 10,000 years ago? To have the same name as he really deserves to die. This was the voice of a girl, delicate as a bell note, yet steeped in ridicule sharp enough to cut. Though he could not tell which private room these two voices came from, he could confirm they were from the 5th floor, which made Ling Han instantly recall the cloaked woman and the elite of the flower-blossoming tier he had seen earlier. Ling Han did not know whether to laugh or to be angered, because both of them were he. Yet one, Ling Han, was lauded to the skies, while the other was trampled and ground beneath foot, leaving him caught between laughter and tears. It was truly a coincidence, but who asked the two of them to share the same name? Could it be that Small Tower had done it deliberately? Hang. I don't know who that Grandmaster Ling from 10,000 years ago is, but the current Ling Han is only 17 years old, but is already an Earth-grade alchemist, no matter where. He would deserve the name of a genius of alchemy. And this is still called overestimating his own abilities? Lu Yutong's displeasure flared. She immediately spoke up to defend Ling Han, her tone crisp and unyielding. Li Xichan nodded as well and said, I am an alchemist too, so I know a bit about that Grandmaster Ling from 10,000 years ago. That Grandmaster became an Earth-grade low-level alchemist only when he was 30. After that, he became an Earth-grade mid-level alchemist 10 years later, Earth-grade high-level 20 years later, and then became a Heaven-grade alchemist 30 years after that. He's also the youngest Heaven-grade alchemist in history. After that, he broke through the limitation of Heaven grade 50 years later and was respectfully acclaimed as the Alchemy Emperor. These words were factual, without the slightest bit of exaggeration. It was recorded as such in the ancient records. But when put together with the words that Lu Yutong had said previously, the meaning became more than obvious. 10,000 years ago, Ling Han had only become an Earth-grade alchemist when he was 30 years old. But what about the current Ling Han? 17 years old. Putting aside how his future accomplishment would be like, but merely comparing his current accomplishment, that was definitely slightly superior to the Ling Han of that generation. Thus, the elder and the girl in the two private rooms were instantly silenced. Who asked Ling Han to be indeed much younger than that Ling Han? Yet Ling Han smiled in spite of himself and shook his head. He had all the memories of his last lifetime, which meant that he was standing on the foundations that had accumulated in his last life and continuing to advance from there. So he was naturally going to exceed his previous lifetime. How could these two lifetimes be put together and compared? Still, he was a bit curious. Though the Ling Han of his last life had been acclaimed as the Alchemy Emperor, he had already died for so many years. Why would these two people still be so reverent about him? Most alchemists knew that these two Ling Han shared the same name, but none of them actually came out to rebuke Ling Han. How baffling. And moreover, there were two of them. Hey, please do not hurt the peace amongst you, esteemed guests. Let us come back to auctioning off this alchemy furnace. Previously, I've said, this is the alchemy furnace that was once used by the ancient Grandmaster Ling Han, and the materials used to construct it are excellent. Unfortunately, it is already damaged. Thus, it can only be taken as an ornament and a token of remembrance. The auctioneer hurriedly soothed the atmosphere, smoothing voices as one might smooth ripples on water. He paused, then continued. Something that the ancient Grandmaster Ling has once used is very meaningful. Thus, we can of course not sell it cheaply, or it would be very disrespectful to Grandmaster Ling. Thus, the starting price for this alchemy furnace is 1,000 origin crystals. 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. His words had just fallen, and already there were bidders placing their bids. Listening to the voices, it was Long Yongchang and the other two big bosses of alchemy. That was true. The name of the ancient Ling Han was too well reputed. The things that he had once used were like totems, a pillar of mental support, and possessed a high symbolic significance for the alchemists of the current time period. Within only a while, the price had soared to 10,000, and it was still rising. Very quickly, the price had broken through the high boundary of 50,000. Ling Han was astonished. Could it be that Long Yongchang and the others had come for the alchemy furnace he had used before? To be honest, that alchemy furnace was indeed something good. It was forged from purple moon and star's iron, so its heat conduction and pressure resistance was indeed great. Still, it was already damaged, so it could not possibly be used again for pill concoction. And from the looks of it, it was extremely heavily damaged. Even if one would recycle the materials used to make this alchemy furnace, there would not be much left. Thus, the actual value of this alchemy furnace would be around 10,000 origin crystals. But the current bid had already exceeded that sum by a few times. Chapter 310, Fierce Competition. Translator, Dark Angel. Editor, Kurisu. This was merely an alchemy furnace that Ling Han had once employed in days past, yet now the price of this furnace, whose worth was no more than a token of remembrance, was still climbing like a blazing tide. In the blink of an eye, it had already torn through the lofty threshold of 10,000 origin crystals. But the three great alchemy big bosses showed not the slightest intent to loosen their grip, and their bids continued to stack atop one another without pause. It was as though they would not cease until their coffers were scraped utterly bare. These three alchemists truly cherish Grandmaster Ling Han from 10,000 years ago to the bone, Guang Yuan exclaimed, his voice full of helpless admiration. That's right. It's already over 10,000 origin crystals. How many times has this price surpassed its true value? Zhuju nodded along, equally moved. Ling Han's face instantly darkened like storm clouds. He did not need this kind of true love. Liu Yutong and Li Xichan thought Ling Han was unhappy because he could not compare to the Ling Han of 10,000 years ago, and they hurried to soothe him with gentle words. Hu Niu was even more straightforward. She planted a kiss on his cheek and giggled, bright and unrestrained. Yet Long Yongchang and the others had no thought of yielding. The bid surged to 200,000 and then crept nearer and nearer to 300,000, leaving the entire hall stunned into silence. They were dumbstruck, firstly by the iron determination of these three alchemists, and secondly by the terrifying wealth that alchemists could possess. 300,000 origin crystals. What kind of concept was that? Even for these three alchemy big bosses, 300,000 origin crystals should be an expense that cut to the marrow. After all, they usually only concocted black-grade alchemical pills, and black-grade alchemical pills were ordinarily traded in silver and gold. Moreover, these three alchemists were also in the midst of striving to break through and become Earth-grade mid-level alchemists. Each time they failed, what kind of astronomical price would they have to pay for the ingredients consumed? Those ingredients certainly had to be bought with origin crystals. Thus, it was indeed astonishing that these three alchemists had managed to save 300,000 origin crystals. Yet they had likely reached their limits. Indeed, after the bid had climbed to 30,000, the three alchemy big bosses were clearly wavering, their confidence thinning. Finally, the price was fixed at 332,853 origin crystals. Why were there scraps? That was because Long Yongchang and his companions had truly gone all out, taking out every last origin crystal they carried on their persons. The highest bid had been placed by Li Shiyuan. He could not help but beam with delight. At last, he could seize the alchemy furnace once used by the Alchemy Emperor. This was a totem, an emblem heavy with meaning. "Is there anyone interested in bidding?" the auctioneer asked. He was extremely shocked that the price had reached such heights, and yet at the same time, it felt reasonable. His shock was because this was merely a damaged alchemy furnace. But who asked it to have once been used by the Alchemy Emperor? In the eyes of his devotees, not just 300,000, even 1,000,000 would be worth it. 400,000! At this moment, a young, melodious female voice rang out. She offered her bid with perfect calm, yet it struck everyone like thunder. That was 400,000 origin crystals, not 400,000 gold and silver coins. Ling Han heard it with absolute clarity. This girl was precisely one of the two who had mocked him earlier. He had been curious before. Since these two admired the him from 10,000 years ago, why had they not spoken a single word while the auction was ongoing? So it turned out they had been confident of the outcome, and now unleashed a direct kill. True enough, after so much bidding, she naturally understood the limits of Long Yongchang and the others. Thus, her first bid was a direct kill, allowing her to save as much as possible. 500,000. Another voice followed. It was rough and aged, the very voice of the other person who had mocked Ling Han earlier, that elder. 600,000. The girl raised her bid without the slightest hesitation, as if 600,000 were no more than scraps of paper. 700,000. The elder did not retreat in the least. 900,000. This time, it was Long Yongchang's voice. The three alchemy big bosses must have joined hands and pooled their respective origin crystals. 1,000,000. The girl and the elder spoke at the same time. 1,500,000. The girl paused briefly, then called out an astronomical figure in one breath. It seemed she was an impatient sort, unwilling to inch the price upward bit by bit any longer. 2,000,000. The elder was equally fearless. These were two super rich people. At the beginning, who would have imagined that the true competitors for this alchemy furnace would be these two? Setting aside their identities, merely the fact that they could produce 2,000,000 origin crystals was enough to qualify them to sit within a private room on the 5th floor. To Spirit Treasure's Pavilion, being a business establishment, anyone with enough money was their dad. Ling Han could not help but sigh ruefully, and muttered, "I've used a considerable number of alchemy furnaces by now, so should I consider selling them off as well?" This made Liu Yutong and Li Xichan laugh. They thought he was mocking himself. There was no way they could guess that the two Ling Hans were actually one and the same. After the price had reached such a terrifying level, even Long Yongchang and his companions could only become spectators. They felt it was truly a pity. That was an alchemy furnace once used by the Alchemy Emperor, and if it could be displayed in Star Brilliance Palace Hall, it would definitely transform this place into the Holy Land for all alchemists. Yet they did not know that so long as Ling Han once again reached the apex in the future, this place, being the crucial location where Ling Han had broken through to Earth-grade alchemist, would surely become the Holy Land for alchemists. 300,000 2-stars origin crystals. The girl placed another bid, and in an instant, it frightened everyone out of their wits. In theory, if the grade of origin crystals rose, their value would increase tenfold. But in truth, no one would be willing to spend high-grade origin crystals like ordinary money. Put it this way, if the same amount of 1-star origin crystals could allow one to successfully break through in 3 years' time, then using that same amount of 2-star origin crystals would take only 1 year. That's right, time was the most important factor, especially for martial artists below the flower blossom tier, who possessed a lifespan of merely 100 years. Thus, the earlier and the younger, they broke through to the spiritual pedestal tier. The more time they would have to attempt breaking through to the flower blossom tier. Once they succeeded, they would be able to cast off their mortal body. 1-star origin crystals were formed by spiritual ocean tier martial artists and were extremely beneficial to the cultivation of those in the body refining, element gathering, gushing spring, and spiritual ocean tiers, as they could supply sufficient origin power. However, for those in the spiritual pedestal tier, the effects of 1-star origin crystals would be greatly reduced, and only 2-star origin crystals would have enough effect. And for those in the flower blossom tier, aside from the fact that 1-star origin crystals could be spent like money, they were complete trash. Thus, the higher the grade of origin crystals, not only the better the effects, but also the greater the range of uses. There were some extremely valuable spirit medicines that not only required payment in origin crystals, they might even demand 4-star, 5-star, or even 6-star origin crystals. Thus, the true value of 300,000 2-star origin crystals far exceeded the value of 300,000 1-star origin crystals. 400,000 2-star origin crystals, the elder answered, similarly calm. Everyone was so shocked, their eyeballs looked ready to pop from their sockets. What kind of concept was 400,000 2-star origin crystals? That would require 40,000 spiritual pedestal tier martial artists to work at concocting them for an entire year. In the whole North region, were there even 10,000 spiritual pedestal tier martial artists? Most importantly, these two were completely composed, as though they did not care at all. Were they really from the North region? Ling Han was also filled with curiosity. He could still understand why Long Yongchang and his companions would fight over this alchemy furnace. But what were these two fighting over it for? He could not help but activate the Eye of Truth and gaze toward them. He first locked onto the elder, but the latter immediately sensed his probing. He gave a heavy humph, and a wave of sound spread outward. Woo! Linghan let out a muffled groan, and at once a stream of blood burst from his right eye. From this single blow, he suffered grievously, the flower blossom tear, power that surpassed the mortal realm. Linghan! Liu Yutong and the others were extremely shocked. Why had he suddenly shed tears of blood out of nowhere like this? Only Who Knew fixed a stare in a particular direction, her vigilance sharp. It was precisely where that elder was. Clearly, the little girl was not glaring at random. She had truly sensed something abnormal, and her gaze instantly turned vicious.